Organisers. Thank you. Oxford, this is amazing. I cannot believe that we sat down in Chris Goodall's living room on Tuesday, and here we are on Sunday with, well, I have no idea how many people. It's probably coming close to 1,000 or so. The police estimate, more, is it more? The police estimate is 50. But this has to be the fastest and most spectacular mobilisation in recent Oxford history, and it makes me incredibly proud to call this city home. Now, we're all here because our hearts have been touched by the plight of the desperate Syrian refugees. Now, as I mentioned, we started organising this on Tuesday. On Wednesday, that photo was published that shocked the world and that changed the national mood in a single instant. And this was 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi, who was washed up, drowned on the beach in Turkey. Aylan was buried with his mother, Reyhan, and his brother, Galip, in Kobane on Friday. And I want to ask first for a minute's silence to remember this little boy who could have belonged to any of us here today. Thank you. Well, if something can come out of this individual tragedy, it's the fact that Europe as a whole has woken up. 4 million Syrian refugees need our help, and Syria is not the only conflict zone. Putting up razor wire fences is not the answer. They need food, they need shelter, above all they need a place of refuge. And that's what we're gathered here together in Oxford to offer. Now, we've just done a silence, and now it's time to send a message as loudly as possible. So I want to say loud and clear with one voice, refugees are welcome here, okay? Ready? 2, 3.
Refugees are welcome here!
Can we do it louder so David Cameron can hear? Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Refugees are welcome here!
And one more time for Nigel Farage. 2, 3.
Refugees are welcome here!
Thank you, that was amazing. Now I'm going to exercise chairman's privilege here. So first to speak is my daughter Rosa. Rosa, how old are you?
8.
And what do you want to say?
I want to say that I want families to have a safe home like I do. I want children to go to a good school like I do. I want children to have lots of friends like I do. That's why I welcome refugees.
Thank you, Rosa. Now, Oxford's home to some pretty amazing and admittedly rather famous people, and we've got one of them here today to show his support. So please welcome, first of all, best-selling author of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, Mark Haddon.
I was born just outside Northampton, 3 miles from West Haddon and 5 miles from East Haddon. I come out of a gene pool so spectacularly shallow, it's amazing that I can tie up my own shoelaces and count to 10. But even I am only here because in 1847, Daniel Flynn Sullivan crossed the Irish Sea from Dromcollier in County Limerick to get away from the Great Famine. Almost everyone that I know in my extended family, among my friends, among my colleagues, is the child, the grandchild, or the great-grandchild of an asylum seeker, or a refugee, or a migrant. And so are you. And so is everyone. And if they don't think they are, they're just not looking hard enough at their own family. Some of you will have seen Michael Portillo on the latest edition of BBC's This Week programme, when he said that he agreed with Nigel Farage that refugees coming across the Mediterranean in tiny boats should be sent back to where they came from. Andrew Neil, slightly aghast, asked him if he really meant that Eritreans and Somalis and Syrians should be dumped on beaches in Libya, and he said yes. Luis Portillo, his father, was a Republican during the Spanish Civil War. Immediately after the Civil War, he gained and was granted asylum in the UK, where he worked in a camp for refugee Spanish children. We forget so easily and so quickly. The last generation's asylum seeker is this generation's neighbour, dentist, parent in the school playground, husband, wife. It's what makes us what we are. It makes this little two-horse town halfway up the Thames into a thriving hub that sometimes seems connected to every single place in the world. And the wealth and the safety that we have means nothing if we slam the door in the faces of people who are destitute. When Bayern Munich and the football fans of Borussia Dortmund are teaching the British government a lesson in compassion and humanity, then the country has entered a very dark place. I'm really tired of politicians who wring their hands and talk about money and practicalities. I'm tired of politicians who say I'm profoundly moved and deeply saddened, but this course of action is impractical, and that course of action is too expensive, and this third course of action might lose us popularity.
Hear, hear.
Sometimes you have to just act because it's the morally right thing to do. And maybe it's complicated, and maybe it's expensive, and maybe you're going to lose votes, but those things are irrelevant. It's called leadership. You work out a way of making it happen, and you make it happen. Because the alternative is shameful, because it's not us and them, it's us and us. And David Cameron needs to learn a lesson from Angela Merkel and Bayern Munich. Be more German, do the right thing, open the door.
Thank you. That was Mark Haddon, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Haddon. One more round of applause, thank you so much for that. Now, more than half a century ago, during the last great refugee crisis, only about 200 yards from here, down past St Mary's Church and the old library, an aid agency was founded called Oxfam. And our next speaker, Sally Copley, is head of campaigns at Oxfam. Sally.
Good afternoon, everybody. When I told Mark I would speak this afternoon, he said there would be 80 people. But it's no coincidence that Oxfam was founded in Oxford, is it? I'm so proud to be from Oxford this afternoon. It's fantastic to see you all. Every refugee is a mother or a daughter, a father or a son, in search of the most basic right for themselves and their families: safety. But something terrible is happening when political leaders and the media are able to drip disdain on unspeakable human suffering. Certain sections of the media and some politicians would have us believe we are facing a crisis in Europe. They warn of marauding migrants invading, sneaking, stealing, rather than accepting that whoever you are, migrant, refugee, woman, man or child, you are a person deserving of respect and compassion. And that if you're a person fleeing conflict and persecution, as many are, you have a legal right to protection and to be given refuge. They describe an illegal immigrant aged 13 found wandering on the motorway, rather than a lost child. They talk about swarms of people coming into Europe, when in truth, the numbers of people trying to get into Europe are less than 1% of the continent's population. And none of those things are crises. A crisis is that today there are almost 60 million people displaced across the world. A crisis is when deadly clashes and airstrikes in Yemen see more than 4,300 people killed, over 1.4 million people forced to leave their homes, struggling to find food and water, and 21 million people in just one country in need of aid. A crisis is when over 4 million people from just one country, Syria, have to run from their home because of staggering levels of suffering and violence. A crisis is when Lebanon, a tiny developing country, hosts over 1 million Syrian refugees. That's a quarter of the total population. A crisis is trying to get to sleep in your own home and not knowing whether your roof will still be there in the morning or whether your house will be bombed overnight. A crisis is when you have to pick up your children and run from your home, when all that you can carry becomes all that you have. A crisis is when you risk everything, and I mean everything, in a desperate attempt to get a better life, or any life. So we know that people do not leave their homes lightly. And in our work at Oxfam, we see every day that people are fleeing war-torn and poverty-stricken countries because of overwhelming levels of pain, of fear and suffering. And there is no world where this is okay. The real crisis for the UK is not that there could be too many refugees for us to cope with, or that we can't afford it. It's that we might not do the right thing, that we might say we're doing enough already. But the reason there are so many people here today, and it's so wonderful to see so many people here today, we're here because we know what the right thing to do is, the human thing to do is. And we can rightly be proud that the UK is one of the biggest donors to countries like Syria, and we know that that money is well spent. But we cannot and will not ignore the other half of the job. While the suffering is so immense, so unbearable, we have to make sure that in Europe and in the UK we do everything we can to help. It's good that we are saying there will be more refugees settled in the UK, but it needs to be more, it needs to be quickly, and it needs to be an ongoing commitment. It all sounds eminently doable to me. Saving lives and protecting people has to be the first priority. As Rebecca, aged 28, a South Sudanese refugee who's now in Uganda, told Oxfam, being a refugee is not a crime. It is not a caste. In life you can be a citizen, in life you must still have your rights. So we're all joined together because we are humanising the voices of immigrants around the world. We want to restore the collective humanity at all levels of society. So share their human stories when you hear them, promote the campaigns of humanitarian and civil society organisations, and stand firm against any suggestion that undermines the protection of human life. That is why we are here this afternoon, to say both out loud and together, to say to all refugees, you are welcome here. You are very, very welcome here.
Thank you, Sally Copley from Oxfam. It's a source of great pride for Oxford that Oxfam is based in this city. It's a source of great shame, however, that just up the road there's an immigration detention centre called Campsfield. where people have been detained with no legal rights and can be detained indefinitely. Now, one of the groups which supports asylum seekers in general is also based here in Oxford. That's Asylum Welcome, and I would like to hear next from Kate Smart, who's the director of Asylum Welcome. Kate, please.
Hello. What a historic day. What a historic day for Oxford. Oh, sorry. I was just saying, what a historic day for Oxford. The first demonstration of this kind in the UK, copying so many demonstrations in other European cities. It's no surprise really that it's being held here in this wonderful, historic, tolerant, outward-looking, intelligent, free-thinking city. So it's a real day to be proud of being part of Oxford. But for us who work at Asylum Welcome, we know all too well that already, before we start to talk about welcoming more asylum seekers and refugees to Oxford, we know that already there are people falling through the gaps here. We see every week people who are already sleeping rough in the parks in Oxford who are asylum seekers and refugees because the national system is not caring for them and there is not enough capacity in our charity to help. So just to say a little bit about Asylum Welcome for those who don't know it, it is the most amazing charity. We are very much a grassroots charity. We have 120 active volunteers. It's run almost entirely by volunteers who turn up every week to help. As Mark said, we run the visitor group. We run the visitor group to Campsfield Detention Centre, and we also run a hotline for detainees to phone us, and we help to get in touch with their family and friends and lawyers and doctors and so on. We run an advice centre, we do English lessons, we provide food, we help people to get jobs, we help people to get housing, we have a dedicated youth service and youth club for teenagers who've arrived without their parents, and so much more. And because we are run by volunteers, they're constantly coming up with new ideas. So the two things I wanted to say are, firstly, to politicians nationally and in Oxford, please be brave, because you have us behind you. You have the people of Oxford behind you. You have organisations. You have organisations like Asylum Welcome that really know what they're doing behind you. You also have people who've been around the refugee world like myself for a long time, who worked on the Kosovo evacuation programme, who know how to organise these kinds of new programmes.